Captain Sarah Martinez stood at the edge of the tarmac, watching the F-16 Fighting Falcon gleam under the harsh Nevada sun. The sleek fighter jet represented everything she had fought for during the past 8 years of her military career. Every rejection, every doubt, every whispered comment about women not belonging in combat aircraft had led to this moment. Today, she would finally climb into the cockpit of the most advanced fighter jet in the United States Air Force arsenal. The year was 1993, and the military was slowly beginning to change its stance on women in combat roles. For decades, female pilots had been restricted to transport, refueling, and training aircraft. The idea of a woman flying a fighter jet into combat seemed impossible to most military leaders. They claimed women lacked the physical strength, mental toughness, and killer instinct necessary for aerial combat. Sarah had heard these arguments countless times, but she never let them stop her from pursuing her dream. Growing up in a small town in Texas, Sarah had always been fascinated by aircraft. Her father worked as a mechanic at the local airport, and she spent countless hours watching planes take off and land. When she turned 16, her father surprised her with flying lessons for her birthday. The moment she took control of that small Cessna 172, she knew she wanted to spend her life in the sky. Her instructor, a former military pilot named Captain Johnson, recognized her natural talent immediately. "You have hands for flying," he told her after just her third lesson. "Most people fight the airplane, but you work with it. That's something you can't teach." Sarah excelled in high school, maintaining perfect grades while participating in ROTC and the Aviation Club. Her guidance counselor suggested she consider the Air Force Academy, but warned her about the limitations she would face as a woman. The counselor meant well, but her words only strengthened Sarah's determination. She spent hours researching military aviation and studying the stories of pioneering female pilots like Jackie Cochran and the women Air Force service pilots of World War II. When Sarah arrived at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, she was one of only 300 women among 4,000 cadets. The academy was a challenging environment where physical and mental toughness were tested daily. Male cadets often questioned whether women belonged there, especially those who expressed interest in flying combat aircraft. Sarah learned to ignore the comments and focus on her performance. She graduated third in her class with a degree in aeronautical engineering. After the academy, Sarah entered pilot training at Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi. The training was intense, beginning before dawn and continuing well into the evening. Student pilots learned everything from basic flying techniques to advanced combat maneuvers. Sarah quickly proved herself capable of handling any aircraft they put her in. She mastered the T-37 Tweet trainer and excelled in the more powerful T-38 Talon. Her instructors were impressed by her precision, quick thinking, and calm demeanor under pressure. Despite her excellent performance, Sarah faced constant reminders that her career options were limited. While her male classmates could aspire to fly F-15 Eagles, F-16 Fighting Falcons, or A-10 Thunderbolts, Sarah was channeled toward transport aircraft like the C-130 Hercules or KC-135 Stratotanker. The restriction frustrated her, but she accepted her assignment to fly C-130s with grace and professionalism. For 3 years, Sarah flew cargo missions around the world. She transported supplies to remote bases, participated in humanitarian missions, and proved herself as a reliable and skilled pilot. During a particularly challenging mission delivering supplies to a base in South Korea during a severe thunderstorm, Sarah successfully landed despite dangerous wind conditions that had forced other aircraft to turn back. Her commanding officer, Colonel Williams, was so impressed that he wrote a glowing recommendation letter for her personnel file. The turning point came in 1991 when Congress began seriously debating the role of women in combat. The Persian Gulf War had demonstrated the changing nature of modern warfare, where the traditional front lines were becoming increasingly blurred. Female pilots had flown support missions in combat zones, proving their ability to operate effectively under hostile conditions. Sarah watched the debates with intense interest, hoping that change might finally be coming. During this time, Sarah continued to hone her flying skills, study fighter aircraft tactics in her spare time. She read every manual she could find about the F-16 and F-15, memorizing performance specifications and combat procedures. Other pilots sometimes joked about her obsession with fighter jets, but Sarah remained focused on her goal. She knew that if the opportunity ever came, she needed to be ready. In early 1993, the Department of Defense announced that combat aircraft restrictions for women would be lifted. Sarah was flying a routine cargo mission when she heard the news over the radio. Her heart pounded as she realized that her dream might finally become reality. However, she also knew that being allowed to fly combat aircraft and actually getting the opportunity would be two very different things. The announcement created controversy throughout the Air Force. Many male pilots and commanders remained skeptical about women in fighter cockpits. They argued that female pilots would be a distraction, that they lacked the physical strength to handle high-performance aircraft under combat stress, and that the presence of women would undermine unit cohesion. Sarah understood that she would face intense scrutiny and that any mistake would be magnified and used as evidence against all female combat pilots. When applications opened for the first female fighter pilot training class, Sarah immediately submitted her paperwork. The selection process was rigorous, involving extensive medical examinations, psychological evaluations, and interviews with senior commanders. Sarah's flying record was exemplary, but she knew that politics and prejudice might influence the selection committee's decision. The medical examination was particularly thorough. Doctors measured Sarah's physical strength, tested her reaction times, and evaluated her ability to withstand the high gravitational forces common in fighter aircraft. Some officials argued that women's smaller physical stature would prevent them from reaching critical flight controls during high-stress maneuvers. Sarah had spent months preparing for these tests, working with a personal trainer to build her strength and endurance. When the results came back, she had exceeded the minimum requirements in every category. The psychological evaluation was equally challenging. Military psychologists wanted to ensure that female pilots could handle the stress of combat and the aggressive mindset required for air-to-air warfare. They questioned Sarah about her motivations, her ability to make life-or-death decisions under pressure, and her willingness to engage enemy aircraft in combat. Sarah answered honestly, explaining that she had wanted to be a fighter pilot since childhood and that she understood the serious responsibilities that came with the role. The final interview took place at Pentagon headquarters with a panel of senior Air Force generals. Sarah wore her dress blue uniform and prepared for the most important conversation of her military career. The generals asked pointed questions about her flying experience, her leadership abilities, and her thoughts on women in combat roles. One general asked if she thought her presence in a combat unit might distract male pilots or create romantic complications. Sarah looked the general directly in the eye and responded firmly, "Sir, I believe that professional military personnel should be able to focus on their mission regardless of who they're serving alongside. If someone can't maintain their concentration because of my presence, then perhaps they're not ready for combat either." The room fell silent for a moment before another general smiled slightly and made a note in his folder. Sarah left the interview feeling confident, but uncertain about the outcome. The selection process would take several more weeks, and she knew that only a handful of women would be chosen for the first class. While waiting for the results, Sarah continued her regular duties flying C-130 missions. She tried not to think about the selection process, but it was impossible to ignore. This opportunity represented everything she had worked toward for nearly a decade. If she wasn't selected, it might be years before another chance came along. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in late spring. Sarah was in her quarters reading technical manuals when her commander called with the news. She had been selected for F-16 training at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. Sarah thanked her commander calmly, but as soon as she hung up the phone, she let out a yell of excitement that probably woke half the base. Sarah's selection made headlines in military publications and civilian newspapers. Some articles praised the historic breakthrough for women in aviation, while others questioned whether the military was compromising combat effectiveness for the sake of political correctness. Sarah tried to ignore the media attention and focus on preparing for the challenge ahead. The desert heat shimmered off the runway at Luke Air Force Base as Sarah Martinez stepped off the transport aircraft that brought her to Arizona. The base was home to the 56th Fighter Wing, responsible for training the world's most elite F-16 pilots. Sarah carried her duffel bag across the tarmac, knowing that every step brought her closer to either the greatest triumph or the most devastating failure of her military career. Luke Air Force Base buzzed with activity as dozens of F-16s took off and landed throughout the day. The sound of jet engines was constant, a reminder of the serious business conducted there. Sarah reported to the squadron building where she would spend the next 6 months learning to fly and fight in one of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft. The training program had a failure rate of nearly 30%, and Sarah knew that as the first woman in the program, her performance would be scrutinized more closely than any other student. Her classmates were 23 other pilots, all men, all skeptical about the presence of a woman in their ranks. Some tried to hide their doubts behind polite professionalism, while others made their feelings clear through cold stares and whispered conversations that stopped when Sarah entered the room. She had expected this reaction and was determined not to let it affect her focus. The F-16 would not care about her gender when she was pulling 8 gravitational forces in a high-speed turn or engaging enemy aircraft in combat. The first week consisted of classroom instruction covering F-16 systems, performance characteristics, and emergency procedures. Sarah took detailed notes as instructors explained the aircraft's sophisticated radar system, weapons capabilities, and electronic countermeasures. The F-16 was a technological marvel, capable of engaging multiple targets simultaneously while avoiding enemy missiles and ground-based threats. Pilots needed to master dozens of switches, buttons, and computer displays while flying at speeds that left little room for error. Major Tom Henderson, the lead instructor, was a veteran F-16 pilot with over 15 years of fighter experience. He had served in combat during the Persian Gulf War and was known for his demanding standards and direct communication style. Henderson made it clear from the first day that he would treat all students equally, regardless of their background or the political implications of their presence in the program. "I don't care if you're a man, woman, or Martian," Henderson told the class. "The F-16 will kill you if you're not prepared, and it will kill other people if you're not competent. My job is to make sure that doesn't happen." Sarah appreciated Henderson's straightforward approach. She had grown tired of people walking on eggshells around her because of her gender. The major's attitude suggested that she would be judged solely on her performance, which was exactly what she wanted. The ground school phase included extensive study of air-to-air combat tactics, weapons systems, and threat recognition. Students learned to identify enemy aircraft types, understand their capabilities, and develop strategies for defeating them in battle. Sarah found herself fascinated by the complex chess game of aerial warfare, where pilots needed to think several moves ahead while flying at supersonic speeds. After 2 weeks of classroom instruction, the students moved to flight simulators that replicated the F-16 cockpit experience. The simulators were incredibly realistic, featuring actual aircraft controls and computer displays connected to sophisticated software that modeled flight characteristics and weapons systems. Sarah spent hours in the simulator practicing normal procedures, emergency responses, and combat scenarios. The simulator training revealed the enormous complexity of operating a modern fighter aircraft. Pilots needed to monitor multiple radar displays, manage weapons systems, communicate with ground controllers, and navigate through hostile airspace while maintaining formation with other aircraft. Sarah's background flying transport aircraft had given her excellent basic flying skills, but the F-16 required a completely different level of multitasking and situational awareness. Her first simulator session was humbling. Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the amount of information flowing through the cockpit displays while trying to maintain control of the aircraft. The F-16 was far more responsive than any plane she had flown before, requiring precise control inputs to avoid dangerous situations. By the end of the first session, she had crashed the simulated aircraft twice and felt thoroughly defeated. Major Henderson debriefed her performance with typical directness. "Martinez, You're trying to fly this airplane like a cargo plane. The F-16 is a thoroughbred racehorse, not a plow horse. You need to think faster, react quicker, and trust your instincts more. Sarah took the criticism to heart and dedicated herself to improvement. She spent extra hours in the simulator, practicing basic maneuvers until they became instinctive. Slowly, she began to understand the aircraft's personality and develop the quick reflexes necessary for fighter operations. Her male classmates noticed her dedication, and some began to show grudging respect for her work ethic. The breakthrough came during her 8th simulator session when Sarah successfully completed a complex air-to-air engagement scenario. She had detected enemy aircraft on her radar, maneuvered into an advantageous position, and fired missiles that destroyed both targets while avoiding their return fire. The entire sequence took less than 3 minutes, but it represented weeks of preparation and practice. Now you're starting to think like a fighter pilot, Henderson told her after reviewing the mission tape. Keep it up, and you might actually survive your first real flight. The first actual F-16 flight was scheduled for Sarah's 4th week of training. She spent the night before studying aircraft systems and emergency procedures, knowing that any mistake could be fatal. The F-16 was an unforgiving aircraft that demanded respect and preparation from its pilots. Unlike transport planes with multiple crew members to help manage emergencies, fighter pilots flew alone and needed to handle any situation that arose. Sarah arrived at the aircraft 2 hours before takeoff to conduct her pre-flight inspection. The F-16 sat on the flight line like a caged predator, its sleek lines and powerful engine promising incredible performance. She walked around the aircraft carefully, checking control surfaces, weapon stations, and engine intakes for any signs of damage or foreign objects. The pre-flight inspection was critical because there would be no opportunity to make repairs once airborne. Major Henderson would fly alongside her in a 2-seat F-16D trainer, providing instruction and monitoring her performance. Sarah climbed into the cockpit and began the complex startup sequence, following a checklist that covered dozens of switches and systems. The cockpit was cramped but efficient, with every control positioned for quick access during combat maneuvers. The engine startup was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The F-16's Pratt and Whitney turbofan engine produced over 29,000 pounds of thrust, creating a deep rumble that she felt through her entire body. As the engine reached full power, she could sense the enormous energy waiting to be unleashed. This was no cargo plane, but a weapon of war designed for speed and agility. Taxiing to the runway required careful attention because the F-16's tricycle landing gear made it prone to nose-wheel steering problems. Sarah followed Henderson's aircraft to the end of the runway where they conducted final checks of flight controls and engine performance. Air traffic control cleared them for takeoff, and Sarah advanced the throttle to full power. The acceleration was breathtaking. The F-16 leaped forward like a rocket, reaching flying speed in less than 1,000 feet of runway. Sarah felt herself pressed back into her seat as the aircraft climbed rapidly into the Arizona sky. Within minutes, they were flying at 20,000 feet and climbing toward their training altitude. "How does it feel, Martinez?" Henderson's voice crackled through her headset. "Like nothing I've ever experienced before, sir," Sarah replied, her voice filled with excitement. "This airplane wants to fly." The training flight included basic maneuvers such as turns, climbs, and descents, but even these simple exercises revealed the F-16's incredible capabilities. The aircraft could change direction instantly, climb at rates that defied belief, and dive at speeds that made Sarah's previous flying experience seem like slow motion. She felt a connection with the machine that went beyond mere pilot training. During the flight, Henderson demonstrated some of the aircraft's combat capabilities. He rolled the F-16 inverted and pulled several gravitational forces during high-speed turns. Sarah experienced the crushing weight of acceleration that tried to force blood away from her brain, but her physical conditioning helped her maintain consciousness and control. The anti-gravity suit she wore inflated automatically to help maintain blood circulation during high-stress maneuvers. "Your turn, Martinez," Henderson instructed. "Show me a 4-gravity, turn to the right." Sarah banked the aircraft sharply and pulled back on the control stick, feeling the familiar pressure of gravitational forces. The F-16 responded immediately, turning in a tight circle that would have torn the wings off most aircraft. She maintained altitude and airspeed throughout the maneuver, demonstrating the precision control that fighter pilots needed to survive in combat. "Not bad for a cargo pilot," Henderson commented with what Sarah detected might have been approval in his voice. The training flight lasted 90 minutes and covered a wide range of basic fighter maneuvers. Sarah landed the aircraft smoothly, despite the F-16's tendency to float during approach. As she taxied back to the flight line, she felt a sense of accomplishment that surpassed anything in her previous flying career. She had successfully flown an F-16 Fighting Falcon and proven that she could handle the physical and mental demands of fighter aviation. Over the following weeks, Sarah's training intensified as she learned more advanced maneuvers and combat techniques. She practiced air-to-air intercepts, ground attack missions, and defensive counter-air operations. Each flight built upon previous lessons, gradually developing the skills necessary for combat operations. Sarah's performance continued to improve as she gained experience with the aircraft's capabilities and limitations. The other students in her class began to accept her presence as they recognized her dedication and competence. Some even sought her advice on technical matters, acknowledging that her engineering background gave her insights into aircraft systems that pure flying experience might not provide. Sarah was careful to share her knowledge without appearing arrogant or condescending. The most challenging aspect of training was air-to-air combat maneuvering, where pilots engaged in simulated dogfights against instructor pilots flying adversary aircraft. These exercises tested every skill a fighter pilot possessed, requiring split-second decisions and aggressive maneuvering at high speeds. Sarah's first air-to-air engagement was a complete failure as the instructor pilot easily maneuvered behind her aircraft and achieved a simulated missile kill. "You're thinking too much and reacting too slowly," Henderson explained during the debrief. "In air-to-air combat, hesitation equals death. You need to trust your training and act instinctively." Sarah spent extra time studying air-to-air tactics and practicing combat maneuvers in the simulator. She learned to think in 3 dimensions while flying at speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. The key was developing situational awareness that allowed her to track multiple aircraft while planning her own attack and defense strategies. Her improvement was gradual but steady. By her 6th week of training, Sarah had achieved her first air-to-air victory in a training exercise, successfully maneuvering behind an instructor pilot and obtaining a valid missile lock. The achievement was small compared to experienced fighter pilots, but it represented a significant milestone in her development. The weapons training phase introduced Sarah to the F-16's impressive arsenal of air-to-air and air-to-ground munitions. She learned to employ AIM-9 Sidewinder heat-seeking missiles, AIM-120 AMRAAM radar-guided missiles, and precision-guided bombs against various targets. Each weapon system required different employment techniques and tactical considerations. Sarah's first live weapons firing took place at a bombing range in the Nevada desert. She was assigned to attack a simulated enemy installation using Mark 82 general-purpose bombs. The mission required precise navigation, target identification, and weapons delivery while avoiding simulated surface-to-air missiles. Sarah successfully placed her bombs on target, demonstrating the accuracy and composure necessary for combat operations. As training progressed, Sarah noticed that her male classmates were beginning to treat her as an equal rather than a curiosity. They included her in discussions about tactics and techniques, shared their own experiences and insights, and stopped making comments about women in combat. Sarah had earned their respect through performance rather than politics. The final phase of training involved complex missions that combined air-to-air and air-to-ground operations. Students planned and executed strikes against heavily defended targets while fighting off enemy interceptors. These missions tested every skill they had learned and required seamless coordination between multiple aircraft. Sarah's performance during these exercises demonstrated that she had successfully mastered the demanding requirements of fighter pilot training. 3 days before graduation, Major Henderson called Sarah into his office for a final evaluation. She sat across from his desk while he reviewed her training records and performance scores. Sarah had successfully completed every phase of training and ranked in the top third of her class. "Martinez, when you first arrived here, I wasn't sure what to expect," Henderson began. "I've trained hundreds of fighter pilots over the years, and some of the best never made it through this program. You not only made it through, you excelled." Captain Sarah Martinez adjusted her helmet as she walked across the flight line at Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates. The desert sun was beginning to rise over the Persian Gulf, casting long shadows across the concrete where her F-16C Fighting Falcon waited for the morning's mission. It was March 1999, and Sarah had been deployed to the Middle East as part of Operation Southern Watch, enforcing the no-fly zone over southern Iraq. After 6 years of training and preparation, she was finally about to face the ultimate test of a fighter pilot: combat. The previous evening, intelligence briefings had revealed increased Iraqi air activity in the southern no-fly zone. Saddam Hussein's regime had been testing coalition resolve by flying military aircraft in prohibited areas and painting coalition jets with radar targeting systems. Sarah's squadron had been tasked with conducting combat air patrols to intercept any Iraqi aircraft that violated the restricted airspace. For Sarah, this represented the moment she had been working toward since first climbing into an F-16 cockpit. Her squadron mates no longer questioned her presence among them. During 18 months of training and exercises, Sarah had proven herself as capable as any pilot in the unit. She had consistently demonstrated excellent flying skills, tactical awareness, and the cool judgment necessary for combat operations. However, none of that training could fully prepare her for the reality of flying into hostile airspace, where enemy pilots would be trying to kill her. The mission briefing took place at 4:30 in the morning in a secure building adjacent to the flight line. Sarah sat with 11 other F-16 pilots as intelligence officers presented the latest information about Iraqi air defenses, weather conditions, and rules of engagement. The briefing was thorough and professional, covering every aspect of the mission from takeoff to landing. Sarah took careful notes and asked pointed questions about enemy capabilities and friendly force positions. Colonel James Mitchell, the squadron commander, led the briefing and assigned specific responsibilities to each pilot. Sarah would fly as wingman to Major Kevin O'Brien, an experienced fighter pilot with over 2,000 hours in the F-16. Their call signs for the mission would be Viper 1 and Viper 2, and they would patrol the northeastern sector of the no-fly zone where Iraqi activity had been most frequent. Intelligence indicates that Iraqi MiG-29 fighters have been operating from Al-Assad Air Base, Colonel Mitchell explained. They've been probing our response times and testing our radar coverage. Today, we're going to send a clear message that violations of the no-fly zone will not be tolerated. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized the implications of the briefing. This would not be another training exercise or routine patrol. Iraqi pilots might actually challenge the coalition aircraft, leading to the first air-to-air combat since the Persian Gulf War 8 years earlier. She thought about all the training exercises and simulator sessions that had prepared her for this moment. After the briefing, Sarah conducted her pre-flight inspection with extra care. Her F-16C was loaded with 2 AIM-120 AMRAAM radar-guided missiles, 2 AIM-9 Sidewinder heat-seeking missiles, and a full load of 20mm cannon ammunition. The aircraft was configured for air-to-air combat, with external fuel tanks to extend its range over the vast Iraqi desert. Every system needed to function perfectly because there would be no opportunity for maintenance once airborne. The startup and taxi procedures were routine, but Sarah felt an edge of tension that had been absent during training flights. She was about to fly into airspace defended by surface-to-air missiles and patrolled by enemy fighters whose pilots had orders to engage American aircraft. The stakes could not have been higher, and Sarah knew that any mistake might be her last. Major O'Brien led the two-ship formation down the runway at exactly 6:15 as the sun cleared the horizon. Sarah's F-16 followed close behind, the powerful engine pushing her back into her seat as they accelerated through takeoff speed. Within minutes, they were climbing through 20,000 feet and heading northwest toward the Iraqi border. Radio chatter was minimal as both pilots focused on their instruments and the airspace ahead. The flight to their patrol area took 45 minutes, during which Sarah monitored her radar display for any signs of Iraqi aircraft. The F-16s APG-68 radar could detect targets at ranges exceeding 100 miles, giving coalition pilots a significant advantage over older Iraqi aircraft. Sarah also monitored radio frequencies used by AWACS control aircraft that provided early warning of enemy activity throughout the region. Viper flight, this is Magic 17, came the voice of the AWACS controller. We have multiple bogies lifting off from Al-Assad, bearing 340 from your position at 60 miles. Appear to be heading south toward the no-fly zone boundary. Sarah felt adrenaline surge through her system as she realized that Iraqi fighters were airborne and potentially heading toward their patrol area. She checked her weapons systems and radar settings, ensuring that she was ready to engage if necessary. Years of training had prepared her for this moment, but the reality of potential combat was both terrifying and exhilarating. Roger, Magic 17, Major O'Brien responded. Viper flight is turning to intercept. Request positive identification when available. The two F-16s banked left and accelerated toward the approaching Iraqi aircraft. Sarah maintained formation while scanning her radar display for the incoming targets. The bogies appeared on her screen as small symbols moving steadily southward toward the no-fly zone boundary. If they crossed into the restricted airspace, coalition rules of engagement would authorize the F-16s to engage them with deadly force. Viper 2, contact bogies bearing 355 at 42 miles, O'Brien transmitted. Maintain formation and be ready for anything. Sarah acquired the targets on her radar and began tracking their movement. The aircraft appeared to be Iraqi MiG-29 Fulcrums, advanced fighters that posed a serious threat to coalition aircraft. Intelligence reports indicated that Iraqi pilots had been receiving additional training from foreign advisors, making them more dangerous than during the Persian Gulf War. As the distance closed, Sarah's radar began providing detailed information about the Iraqi aircraft. There were 4 MiG-29s flying in loose formation, apparently heading directly for the no-fly zone boundary. Sarah armed her AAM-120 missiles and selected the lead Iraqi aircraft as her target. If combat erupted, she would need to engage quickly and decisively. Magic 17, Viper 1, O'Brien called. Bogies now bearing 358 at 28 miles and closing. Request clearance to engage if they violate the zone. Viper 1, Magic 17. You are cleared to engage any aircraft that cross the no-fly zone boundary. Maintain positive identification and follow rules of engagement. Sarah's mouth felt dry as she realized that combat was now very possible. The Iraqi aircraft were only minutes away from the no-fly zone boundary, and their course suggested they intended to cross it. She checked her weapons one final time and prepared for what might be her first air-to-air engagement. At 15 miles separation, Sarah could see the Iraqi aircraft on her radar display as distinct targets. They were flying in a loose combat formation, suggesting they were prepared for battle. The lead MiG-29 was slightly ahead of the others, making it the primary target for the American fighters. Bogies crossing the line now, O'Brien announced. Engaging lead aircraft with AMRAAM. Sarah watched her radar display as O'Brien's missile streaked toward the lead Iraqi fighter. The AM-120 was a fire-and-forget weapon that would guide itself to the target using its own radar system. Sarah selected the second MiG-29 and prepared to launch her own missile. The Iraqi pilots apparently detected the incoming missile because they began aggressive defensive maneuvers, breaking formation and turning hard to avoid the American weapon. Sarah watched the chaotic dance of modern air combat unfold on her radar screen as aircraft maneuvered at high speed to gain tactical advantage. Fox 3, Sarah called as she launched her AMRAAM at the second Iraqi fighter. The missile left her aircraft and accelerated toward its target, its sophisticated guidance system tracking the maneuvering MiG-29. Sarah immediately began defensive maneuvers of her own as she watched for incoming Iraqi missiles. The first Iraqi fighter disappeared from Sarah's radar screen, indicating that O'Brien's missile had found its mark. A moment later, her own target vanished as well, confirming that her AMRAAM had also been successful. 2 of the 4 Iraqi fighters had been eliminated in less than 30 seconds of combat. The remaining Iraqi aircraft turned and fled northward at maximum speed, apparently unwilling to continue the engagement against superior American weapons and tactics. Sarah and O'Brien pursued them briefly but broke off the chase as the MiGs retreated deep into Iraqi airspace beyond the no-fly zone boundary. "Good shooting, Viper 2, O'Brien transmitted. "That's how it's supposed to work." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and excitement as she realized that her first combat engagement had been successful. She had detected, tracked, and destroyed an enemy aircraft in real combat conditions. More importantly, she had performed exactly as her training had prepared her to do, proving that women could excel in the most demanding aspects of military aviation. The flight back to base was quieter as both pilots processed what had just occurred. Sarah had crossed a threshold that few military personnel ever experience. She had engaged and defeated an enemy in combat. The technical aspects of the engagement had unfolded exactly as her training predicted, but the emotional impact was profound. After landing and shutting down her aircraft, Sarah was met by intelligence officers who debriefed her on every aspect of the engagement. They wanted detailed information about Iraqi aircraft performance, pilot tactics, and the effectiveness of American weapons systems. Sarah provided thorough answers while trying to process her own emotions about the mission. Colonel Mitchell congratulated both pilots on their successful engagement and their professional performance under combat conditions. Sarah's achievement was particularly significant because she had become the first female fighter pilot to achieve an air-to-air victory in combat. The milestone would be noted in official records and military history books. Word of the successful engagement spread quickly throughout the air base and beyond. Sarah found herself the center of attention from fellow pilots, support personnel, and eventually military journalists who wanted to interview the first female fighter pilot to score an air-to-air victory. She tried to downplay her role, emphasizing that she had simply done her job as trained. However, Sarah understood the broader significance of her achievement. For decades, critics had argued that women lacked the physical strength, mental toughness, and killer instinct necessary for air-to-air combat. Her successful engagement had definitively proven that argument wrong. Female pilots could not only fly fighter aircraft competently but could also engage and defeat enemy pilots in combat. The impact of Sarah's achievement extended far beyond her personal career. Young women across the country read about her success and began considering military aviation careers that previously seemed impossible. Military leaders who had opposed women in combat roles were forced to reconsider their positions in light of her demonstrated competence. Sarah continued flying combat missions throughout her deployment, participating in dozens of patrols and escort missions over Iraq. She never again encountered enemy fighters in combat, but her presence helped maintain coalition air superiority over the region. Her squadron mates treated her achievement with the respect it deserved while ensuring that she remained focused on continued improvement as a pilot. When her deployment ended 6 months later, Sarah returned to the United States as a decorated combat veteran and a symbol of changing opportunities for women in the military. She had proven beyond any doubt that gender was irrelevant to success in fighter aviation. Her achievement opened doors for countless other women who would follow in her footsteps. Years later, Sarah would be promoted to colonel and command her own fighter squadron. She mentored dozens of young pilots, both male and female, helping them develop the skills necessary for success in military aviation. Her combat victory remained a source of pride, but she was equally proud of the barriers she had broken and the opportunities she had created for others. The story of Sarah Martinez demonstrated that determination, preparation, and courage could overcome any obstacle. She had refused to accept limitations placed on her because of her gender and had proven that women could excel in the most demanding military roles. Her legacy would inspire generations of female pilots who dared to dream of touching the sky in supersonic fighters. Standing on the flight line at her home base after returning from deployment, Sarah looked up at the F-16 fighters taking off into the blue sky above. Each aircraft represented opportunity and possibility for young people who were willing to work hard enough to achieve their dreams. Sarah had shown them that the sky truly was the limit, regardless of their gender or background. The young girl from Texas who had dreamed of flying fighter jets had become a combat veteran and a pioneer for women in aviation. Her story would be remembered as proof that courage and competence were the only qualifications that mattered in the cockpit of an F-16 Fighting Falcon. Sarah Martinez had not only proven that women could fly fighter jets, she had proven they could excel in combat and lead others to similar success. For Sarah felt a surge of pride, but remained professionally composed. "Thank you, sir. I had excellent instruction. Don't be modest. You earned everything you accomplished here. More importantly, you proved that gender has nothing to do with flying ability or combat effectiveness. I'd be honored to fly into combat with you as my wingman." The graduation ceremony took place on a Friday morning in front of family members, friends, and military officials. Sarah's parents had flown in from Texas to watch their daughter receive her F-16 qualification. As she walked across the stage to receive her certificate, Sarah thought about all the people who had said women couldn't fly fighter jets. Today, she had proven them wrong. Fighter pilot training would be unlike anything she had experienced before. The F-16 Fighting Falcon was a single-engine, multi-role fighter capable of speeds exceeding Mach 2. The aircraft could pull over 9 times the force of gravity during aggressive maneuvers, requiring exceptional physical and mental conditioning from its pilots. Sarah would need to master air-to-air combat, air-to-ground attack missions, and complex electronic warfare systems. Before reporting to Luke Air Force Base, Sarah spent several weeks studying F-16 technical manuals and flight procedures. She memorized emergency checklists, weapon system specifications, and performance limitations. The aircraft's sophisticated radar and weapons systems were far more complex than anything she had operated in transport aircraft. Sarah knew that she would need to absorb an enormous amount of technical information in a short time. The night before leaving for fighter training, Sarah stood outside her quarters looking up at the stars. She thought about all the people who had supported her journey and all those who had doubted her abilities. Tomorrow, she would begin the most challenging phase of her military career. Success would open doors for other women who shared her dream, while failure would set back the cause of women in combat aviation. Sarah had no intention of failing. She had spent too many years preparing for this opportunity to let it slip away. The F-16 Fighting Falcon was waiting for her in Arizona, and she was ready to prove that women could excel in any role the military had to offer. The sky had always been her home, and soon she would defend it as one of America's elite fighter pilots. As she walked back to her quarters to pack her belongings, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and determination. The real test was about to begin, and the entire world would be watching to see if women truly belonged in fighter cockpits. Sarah Martinez was ready to show them exactly what a female fighter pilot could accomplish.